Battle of Nihriya, fought in 1230 BCE, was more than just a military engagement. It was a pivotal moment that heralded the decline of one great empire and the ascent of another. Historians view this battle as the point at which the ancient balance of power in the Near East was irrevocably altered, paving the way for Assyria to become the new dominant force in Mesopotamia, a world on the edge of change. By the 13th century BCE, the Hittite Empire had risen to become one of the ancient world's foremost superpowers. However, under the reign of Tudhaliya IV, internal troubles, including famine, widespread rebellion, and political instability, began to undermine its very foundations. Assyria, in stark contrast, was on the rise under the ambitious leadership of kings like Shalmaneser I and later Tukulti-Ninurta I. Driven by expansionist ambitions, Assyria aggressively sought control of vital trade routes stretching from Syria to Anatolia. At the heart of this geopolitical struggle lay Nihriya, a crucial crossroads that controlled the flow of valuable metals and essential goods. Control of Nihriya meant control of the economic lifeblood of the Near East. Sparks before the storm. The conflict didn't erupt as a full-scale invasion, but rather began with a struggle for influence over the Hurrian city-states bordering Assyria. Many local rulers, increasingly dissatisfied with Hittite dominance, turned to Assyria for protection and support. Tukulti-Ninurta shrewdly seized this opportunity to expand Assyrian influence. Tudhaliya IV recognized the looming danger, but perhaps too late. The fate of Nihriya, and indeed of the two empires, was effectively sealed. Hittite preparations in desperation. Facing a growing crisis, Tudhaliya mustered every available resource. Heavy Hittite chariots, the pride of their military, well-equipped spearmen with large shields for a strong defense. Rear-line archers provide covering fire. Auxiliaries from Hurrian and Luwian territories. However, morale was low. Many chieftains had already defected to Assyria, and the Hittite army marched under a cloud of doubt and uncertainty. Assyria, the new titan of Mesopotamia. Assyria approached the war with a distinctly superior organization and strategy. Light chariots designed for rapid strikes and maneuverability. Highly mobile infantry capable of swift deployments. Exceptionally well-trained archers renowned for their accuracy. Robust logistical support to maintain supply lines. Unified command under the decisive leadership of Tukulti-Ninurta I. Their strategy was straightforward. Strike quickly, overwhelm the enemy, and cut off their vital supply lines. Two armies marched toward fate. In the spring of 1230 BCE, both forces converged on Nihriya. Assyria advanced with remarkable speed, capturing several smaller towns and strategic points before the Hittite forces could effectively respond. The Hittite forces, having marched hundreds of kilometers, arrived exhausted and depleted. Yet Tudhaliya knew that abandoning Nihriya meant potentially losing control of Anatolia entirely. Nihriya's terrain favored the side that occupied it first. Assyria arrived first and immediately began to fortify its position. The night before the battle, Hittite captains, observing the Assyrian entrenchments on the high ground, recognized a perilous situation. Retreat was deemed impossible. It would lead to a complete collapse of morale. According to Hittite accounts, Tudhaliya IV addressed his troops on the eve of battle. If we fall today, the world will be rewritten. His words proved prophetic, more so than he could have possibly imagined. As dawn broke over the valley of Nihriya, both armies understood that the impending battle would determine the destiny of their respective empires. Ancient letters and clay tablets allow us to reconstruct the fierce struggle that followed, a clash of tactics, discipline, and ultimately destiny. Assyria held the high ground. Having arrived first, Assyria strategically secured the hills overlooking the valley. Archers were positioned on the heights to rain down arrows on the enemy. Light chariots were stationed mid-slope for quick counterattacks. Mobile infantry stood ready to intercept any advances below. The Hittites, arriving later, were forced to occupy the lower ground, a significant disadvantage, particularly for their heavy chariots. Hittite opening assault. Realizing that delay meant certain defeat, Tudhaliya IV launched a daring frontal assault. Heavy Hittite chariots charged forward with tremendous force, initially overwhelming the lower Assyrian positions. However, sheer momentum alone couldn't guarantee victory. Assyrian counterstrike. Tukulti-Ninurta promptly orders light chariots to split and attack both Hittite flanks. Simultaneously, Assyrian archers unleashed a devastating barrage of arrows from above. The Hittite formations began to falter and break apart. Heavy chariots in trouble, unable to effectively maneuver on the uneven terrain. Many Hittite chariots crashed or became bogged down. Assyria pressed their advantage, isolating the Hittite chariots into scattered, vulnerable pockets. The decisive blow, striking the supply lines. Assyria deployed a strike force to circle behind the main battlefield and destroy the Hittite supply camp. Within a few hours, the Hittite rear was in complete disarray. Provisions were burned and command tents were captured. This single, bold maneuver shattered the Hittite war effort. The last stand. In a desperate attempt to salvage the situation, Tudhaliya launched a counterattack. His warriors fought with fierce determination, but Assyria's superior mobility ultimately overwhelmed them. Collapse. By sunset, the Hittite army had completely collapsed. Tudhaliya retreated with the remnants of his shattered forces. Assyria captured Nihriya, marking the beginning of its ascent to dominance. Continue from the previous climax, as both the Hittite and Assyrian armies converged near the rocky approaches leading to Nihriya. The battle now shifted into its decisive phase, the direct collision between the elite forces of two of the greatest powers of the Late Bronze Age. Both sides understood clearly that if one formation broke, the entire campaign could collapse within hours. At mid-morning, Assyrian scouts reported that a major Hittite detachment, commanded by one of Muwatalli II's trusted generals, was attempting to move through a narrow mountain pass to reinforce the front lines. This presented Tukulti-Ninurta with a golden opportunity. He immediately ordered his chariot units and light infantry to advance toward the pass and prepare to strike the Hittites before they could fully deploy. But the Hittites were not passive. They quickly realized that the Assyrians had moved much faster than expected, intending to trap them within natural rock corridors. Hittite commanders deployed heavy infantry and elite melee troops at the mouth of the pass. However, the rugged terrain made it difficult for their heavier chariots to maneuver as effectively as they had at Kadesh. Tukulti-Ninurta saw this weakness. He ordered a dual flank assault, with the main thrust delivered by fast and flexible Assyrian chariots. These vehicles could turn quickly, accelerate rapidly, and exploit small openings in enemy lines. Their speed gave them an overwhelming advantage on the uneven ground leading toward Nihriya. The assault caught the Hittites off guard. Assyrian spears and arrows rained down, forcing Hittite infantry to retreat step by step. The chariots formed tight semicircles, isolating small Hittite groups and preventing them from regrouping. The battlefield devolved into a series of scattered but ferocious clashes, throwing the Hittite formation into chaos. Yet the Hittites remained formidable. Their heavy infantry, battle-hardened from previous conflict with Egypt, formed shield walls and counterattacked whenever possible. For a moment, the Assyrians seemed unable to penetrate their defensive lines. Sensing the shift in momentum, Tukulti-Ninurta executed a tactical feint. A portion of his chariots pretended to retreat, drawing several Hittite detachments into the lowlands. Once isolated, Assyrian archers hidden along the ridges unleashed volleys of arrows, killing many mid-ranking Hittite officers and shattering their battlefield coordination. With enemy lines fragmented, Tukulti-Ninurta deployed his elite royal guard to strike at the Hittite command corps. Although Muwatalli II was not present, his top generals and advisors were positioned near the rear. The Hittites desperately tried to hold their ground, but the tide had turned. The front lines were compressed at the pass, while the rear was scattered by relentless chariot strikes. By late afternoon, the Battle of Nihriya had been effectively decided. Even Hittite records later acknowledged the severity of their losses. The Hittite Empire forfeited its grip on Upper Mesopotamia, giving Assyria the strategic breathing room needed to dominate the region. For Tukulti-Ninurta, the victory was not merely military but profoundly political. Assyria was no longer a secondary power. It had defeated the chief northern empire and now stood poised to expand its influence. The triumph became a stepping stone to the rise of the Middle Assyrian Empire. For the Hittites, Nihriya did not immediately destroy their empire, but forced them into defensive isolation within Anatolia and marked the beginning of their long decline. This phase of the battle showcases the brilliance of Assyrian tactical mobility and the limitations of Hittite heavy warfare in complex terrain, while also highlighting the pivotal shift of regional dominance that would shape the next century of ancient Near Eastern history. From the previous turning point, as Assyrian forces pressed their advantage and the Hittite army began to unravel, the Battle of Nihriya now shifted into its final destructive phase, the massive pursuit and the complete collapse of the Hittite northern strategy. Recognizing the signs of disintegration in the enemy lines, Tukulti-Ninurta acted immediately. He ordered his chariot divisions to split into 3 pursuit wings, with the central wing under his own command. His objective was clear: prevent the Hittites from regrouping or reaching their fallback positions in the northern highlands. The Hittites, meanwhile, showed increasing signs of systemic collapse. Units famed for their resilience at Kadesh broke ranks under the pressure of agile Assyrian chariots. Attempt to form temporary defensive lines failed due to severed communication with their commanders. The once disciplined Hittite army was now scattered and disorganized. A crucial turning point came when Assyrian reconnaissance located the enemy supply camp. With swift strikes, Assyrian chariots destroyed food stores, transport wagons, and reinforcement routes. This crippled Hittite logistical capacity and ensured that the campaign could not be prolonged. By midday, a major Hittite force attempted to form a last offensive line west of Nihriya. They fought with ferocity, knowing that defeat here would doom the entire campaign. Assyrian chronicles describe these soldiers as lions in their final fury. Yet even this determination could not withstand Assyria's superior coordination. Archers fired from ridges, chariots flanked the defensive line, and heavy infantry pressed forward in the center. The Hittite line eventually collapsed, forcing their remaining officers to flee northward. At this moment, Tukulti-Ninurta unleashed his elite royal guard to strike at the retreating Hittite command. Despite attempts to escape along side routes, the Hittite leadership was intercepted. Many high-ranking officials were captured. Others perished while trying to cross a swollen river near Nihriya's borderlands. With their command destroyed and their army in ruins, the Hittite northern front ceased to exist. Tukulti-Ninurta declared victory and ordered commemorative steles to be erected. Monuments meant not only to celebrate triumph, but to warn every state in the Near East that Assyria was now the dominant power. The geopolitical impact was immediate. Vassal states formerly aligned with the Hittites shifted allegiance to Assyria. Regions such as Hanagobat, long contested, fell rapidly into Assyrian hands. Tukulti-Ninurta reinforced these territories with governors and fortifications, securing long-term control. This victory cemented his prestige. In royal inscriptions, he was portrayed as the chosen warrior of Ashur, destined to subdue the enemies of the empire. The triumph at Nihriya paved the way for future campaigns, including the famous conquest of Babylon, an event that further solidified Assyria's dominance. Meanwhile, the Hittite Empire spiraled into post-war instability. Although not immediately destroyed, the loss at Nihriya signaled the beginning of their irreversible decline. Border provinces drifted away, military confidence eroded, and the once powerful empire gradually fragmented. Thus, this phase of the narrative illustrates the decisive pursuit, the collapse of the last Hittite line, and the geopolitical transformation triggered by Assyria's overwhelming victory. The Battle of Nihriya stands as one of the most strategically significant victories of the Late Bronze Age. From the decisive collapse of the Hittite army and command structure, the final phase of the Battle of Nihriya became far more significant than any simple battlefield outcome. It marked a complete reconfiguration of Near Eastern power at the end of the Late Bronze Age. Assyria immediately collected enormous spoils, chariots, bronze weapons, armor, and refined metal goods. High-ranking Hittite officers were taken to Assur as political hostages or forced labor, sending a strong message. Assyria had not only defeated the Hittites militarily, but had overtaken them in organization, discipline, and strategic execution. Tukulti-Ninurta consolidated control over Hanagobat, a region contested for centuries. With the Hittite coalition disintegrating, local city-states and tribes rapidly pledged loyalty to Assyria. This swift realignment allowed Assyria to expand with minimal resistance. From the lessons of Nihriya, Assyria launched major military reforms. More lightweight chariots were produced, and the army expanded its archer and mobile infantry units. Assyria embraced fast-paced, high-mobility warfare, something the Hittites failed to adapt to. Meanwhile, the Hittite Empire plunged into post-war crisis. At Attusa, debates raged about military shortcomings. Factional disputes erupted as frontier territories drifted away. The once formidable Hittite military prestige began to crumble. This internal decay gradually widened and, over the following century, contributed to the total collapse of the empire. For Assyria, Nihriya became the gateway from regional power to imperial supremacy. Tukulti-Ninurta launched further campaigns, culminating in the conquest of Babylon, an achievement that signaled the unprecedented rise of Assyria. In larger historical context, Nihriya ended the dual power balance between Hittite and Assyria. It opened an era where Assyria stood as a singular hegemon of Upper Mesopotamia. Their military model, swift chariots, disciplined infantry, elite archers, became the architectural blueprint for warfare in the region. The battle also illustrated an enduring truth of military history. Empires that innovate win. Empires that stagnate lose. Hittite conservatism sealed their fate. Assyrian adaptability secured their dominance. As Hittite influence vanished from diplomatic records and international treaties, Assyria gained control of major trade routes and wealth. This economic growth helped them survive the broader Late Bronze Age collapse that devastated other civilizations. In conclusion, the Battle of Nihriya was not merely a conflict. It was a civilizational turning point. It ushered in Assyria's golden age and contributed to the eventual disappearance of the Hittite Empire. Even millennia later, Nihriya is remembered as one of the era's most decisive battles, where one empire fell and another ascended with unstoppable force.